We are going to have part one of our talk from Alison about mercy ships. Alison came and did a talk for us at Travel Talks in the college in November 2016. So enjoy, and thank you, Alison. Over to Alison.
Okay, it's a pleasure. Thank you. Okay, let's go. Okay, so mercy ships. I'm going to do a brief lightning tour of mercy ships to start with, so you know why I've been traveling around these strange places that I will tell you about after the coffee break. So the reason behind the traveling is before the coffee break, and then some of the unusual things that I've seen on my travels and some of the interesting things that I've seen will be after the coffee break. But mercy ships exists because of this scary fact here, that 2 out of 3 people across the world do not have access to surgical care when they need it. Either they can't afford it or it's just not available. And this is the reason that Mercy Ships is there, to provide free surgical care and other means of health support across the world to the countries that need it the most. And we are so blessed, aren't we, by our NHS. But for many people, there just isn't anything there. And the proportion of people dying just from lack of that surgery it's just about a third, isn't it? Which is far more than the other things that we worry about: HIV, AIDS, TB, malaria. All those things are quite a small proportion compared to this lack of surgical care. And the population dying from that lack of surgical care is the equivalent of the population of these cities. So every year, 18 million people die just because they don't have access to surgery. And so that accounts for, as you can probably guess, about 93% of sub-Saharan Africa are in that category where they don't have that access to the surgical care. We're so blessed here, but for many people, there just isn't a hope at all of having that sort of health care when they need it. And so Mercy Ships came into being because of this lovely pair, Don and Dion Stevens. They're Canadian, and they saw this lack of surgical care across the world, and they wanted to do something. Bless them, they wanted to do something. And so, excuse me, I've just remembered I'm supposed to keep an eye on my WhatsApp just in case something goes wrong. They decided they were going to do something, and bless them, it took just 4 years of raising funds and support to have their first mercy ship, the Anastasis. And the Anastasis, as you can see, was a beautiful ship, an old Italian cruise liner. And they put in operating theatres, and they put in recovery wards, and they set off to provide free healthcare, free surgery, particularly to those who had no hope of it any other way. And the Anastasis did a fantastic job over many, many years. And sadly, she's had to be pensioned off. She had to go to an Indian breaker's yard, because you can't keep pouring your money into something that isn't going to give you a good return for that investment. And so sadly, the Anastasis and the other smaller ships that they had in the early days have been pensioned off. But the Africa Mercy was ready to take over. There was only a 2-week gap between the Anastasis and the Africa Mercy, just 2 weeks for them to run across the docks with all the stuff that needed to be moved over to supplement what had been put onto the Africa Mercy. She was an old Danish rail ferry that was converted at Blythe Shipyard, just north of Newcastle. And she has 5 operating theatres, so a bigger operating capacity than the Anastasis had. Absolutely wonderful facilities. Either brand new equipment was put in or very good second-hand equipment, as good as you or I would expect to find at the Royal Queen's Medical Centre. Absolutely first class. This is actually one of the operating theatres on the Anastasis. Oh, why is it running away without me? Come back. So yes, the Anastasis didn't have quite so much space, as you can see. And I found these old pictures from the Anastasis, which I love to show people, because after the surgery, the patient would be put onto a stretcher and then attached to pulleys, because the recovery wards were on the deck above the operating theatres. And so they would be loaded onto their stretcher and onto the pulley system, and then they would go upstairs to recover. Well, I just hope they didn't get them out of their anaesthetic before all this happened, because I think I would have been scared silly going up there. But fortunately, as we can see, they arrived safely. But wow, what a way to get from surgery to recovery. And then after surgery, of course, many people will need to be on a recovery ward like this, very busy places. And I don't think on this picture you can see, but on some of the pictures of the recovery wards, you can see that not only is the patient on a mattress, but there's actually a mattress underneath their bed, because they can bring in a friend or relative to keep them company and to support them. But the patient has the bed, the relative is on a mattress underneath their bed, because you can't waste a good bed space on a well-paid person. So these are very busy places, but wow, they do a fantastic job, because otherwise these people would have nothing. They would have no hope of this surgery. And some of it is really, really important, life-saving, life-transforming surgery. So it's a great job that they do on there. And this is the scanner they have on the ship. The scanner on the African Mercy is the only scanner in West Africa. None of the hospitals for hundreds of miles around have a scanner. And of course, we've got used to them here, haven't we? You know, at one time there weren't scanners. We would share one between a few counties, but then scanners just became more and more widely used. And now we have 4 or 5 in every major hospital in our country. But out in West Africa, the only one you'll get to is on the African Mercy. So they get absolutely first-class treatment. They have laboratories, of course, for doing blood testing, for doing tissue testing. But these, amazingly, are even quicker than ours, because they are connected by satellite to a laboratory in Bristol. They get their results straight away. They don't have to go away for a week like we do and phone up later. They get their blood and tissue results immediately, which means that the surgeon can then get on with the job rather than having to send the patient away and then readmit them. And they keep their blood extremely fresh, because they keep it in the bodies of their volunteers. And so this is actually the surgeon who donated the blood for the patient, which is an amazing coincidence, isn't it? So he had a good match for her. And so she and some of the nurses are just having a look at his arm to see where it came out. So he would have given his blood and then probably stuck the bandage on, had his half an hour lie down, and then gone straight into theatre to operate. So that was amazing. But yes, all your blood comes from your crew, so you don't have to have a special cool place to keep it nice and fresh. Just get it straight from there on into your patient. And of course, you need your pharmacists. Everybody will be fully qualified, trained up to their registration in their particular field. Particularly if they're medically or marine qualified, you have to have all your qualifications, because these, it's really important. It's just like working in a normal hospital, a normal medical centre. You have to have your proper qualified and the right people to do the right job. And then other things that you get on the ship, your absolute basics, like your laundry. And if you look carefully, you can see that these washing machines are just like the ones we have here, because the blue notice says lost socks. So you can't even go to Africa and escape the lost sock syndrome. It happens there too. But everything needs to be done, doesn't it? You have to have somewhere for your crew to wash your clothes, and somewhere for them to go and borrow a good book, have a rest, have a relax, bit of peace and quiet. All that you need on your ship to look after your patients, and all you need to look after your crew too. And even a couple of little treats. Starbucks, the cheapest Starbucks in the world, because everybody's a volunteer on the ship, so you don't pay anybody to work there. Starbucks kindly donate coffee and syrup every year. So a large cappuccino or a large frappuccino costs about 35 pence, unless you want an extra shot, of course, in which case it'll go up to 50 pence. But otherwise, it's a really good place to be at coffee break. And if you get really hot, there's a little swimming pool on the top deck where you can cool off. So Mercy Ships mainly works in this corner of West Africa, because this is the area where there are the countries of the greatest need. All the countries in the bottom of the United Nations Development Index are in that square there, 15 degrees either side of the North Meridian, 15 degrees either side of the equator. apart from Haiti, all those countries at the bottom of the list are there, the most needy countries of the world. And so this is where Mercy Ships is concentrating its work, simply to get to the worst affected areas. But you'll notice that a large island on the east of Africa is also coloured in, because when Ebola hit Guinea and Mercy Ships was due to go to Guinea, there was no way that they were geared up for looking after patients with Ebola. There's no way they were geared up for being in that sort of situation. That's not what they do. And so they decided they needed to get away from West Africa, as far away as possible from where Ebola might spread. And so they spent 2 years working in Madagascar, again, a very needy place. And then eventually when Ebola became under control, then they went back to Guinea to do what they should have done before, and then on to Senegal. Sadly, of course, they had to leave Senegal earlier than they planned, but that's where they'll go back. So hopefully those patients will be still there with their appointment cards, ready for the surgery that they were hoping for last year. So the ship is in the country for about 10 months of the year, because every year it will have to go to the shipyard to have its annual maintenance, have its insurance checks, things like that. But for 10 months, it will be docked in the same place in that country. And then people will travel for miles and miles, sometimes even from the borders of the neighboring countries. Anyhow that they can, they will get to the ship, because for many people, this is their only hope, their last hope. But even before the ship arrives, they need to advertise what they're offering. So patients can see these notices around town. There will be regular advertisements on the radio, television if they have it, any ways that they can to tell people what's there for them. Because if you don't, how are you going to find your patients? There's no national register like we would have, very little in terms of IT systems. So these posters will go up, these sort of posters around the country, telling them where they can go to be screened. But even more important than that, even more important than the before and after pictures, just to illustrate what can be done, the little symbol in the bottom right of the yellow poster says, "Tout est gratuit," everything is free. It's so important for people to understand that, because otherwise, if you told them that the hospital ship was coming and, well, maybe they can operate on you for that dreadful facial tumor you've had, their first thought would be, well, that'd be ridiculous. I could never afford that. They have to understand that everything is free. They do not need to bring a single coin or note with them. Everything will be provided for them. And that means that anybody can come. And so people will sometimes walk for days and days to get to the queues, and then wait patiently for hours and hours in the hot sun, the pouring rain. They just don't mind how long they wait. And then eventually everybody will be seen by a member of the crew, and alongside them, a really important person, one of the day workers, because most of the patients will only speak their local language, and most of the crew won't speak any local languages. And so Mercy Ships will employ about 250 local people to work alongside the ship every year, mainly working as translators, but also filling in some other gaps in the crew system. But these day workers are absolutely vital to the work of Mercy Ships. They are fantastic. We just could not do what we do without them, because you have to have the most accurate information from your patient, and you must be able to convey back to them what you need them to know. And then hopefully people will leave with their precious appointment card and then be back in time for their surgery. And these are the different sorts of surgeries that Mercy Ships is offering. Obviously, general covers all sorts of things. So we'll just go through a few of the cases just for you to see the sort of things that happen. But do be careful, if you want to close your eyes, that's fine, because sometimes some of the before pictures can be hard to look at. We don't see these things in our country because they never get to the state that they are in out there. And so we're not used to seeing these things, but it's worth looking at the after pictures always. So maxillofacial, things like cleft lip, cleft palate, and sometimes huge facial tumors. This little chap, Junior, he arrived at the ship just as the ship arrived in town. So it was expecting that it would take about 4 days to set the hospital area up, ready to take the first patient in. but he was so severely malnourished because he had cleft lip, cleft palate. His mum just could not get enough nourishment into him. I think he was about 3 or 4 months old at this stage. And he was seriously, seriously underweight and malnourished, such that they said, this baby can't wait 4 days. We need to get him onto the ship now and get him connected up to a drip and get him starting to feed and starting to be nourished. And so they set up a little area just for Junior and his mum, just to be able to get them there, because they were afraid he wouldn't survive the 4 days until the actual hospital area was ready for him. And so they spent a lot of time building up his strength. And they used to call him, what do they call him? Baby, not Baby Bob, I can't remember now, but Baby Paul, that's right, that was his other name, Baby Paul. But after a while, they started calling him Chunky Monkey, because as you can see, he really did feed up well, but he kept getting infections. And in the end, he was the last but one patient to leave the ship 10 months later. But as you can see, he looks fantastic, doesn't he? What a little grin. And I can just imagine he's going to be a little handful now. But his mum won't mind, will she? Because she knows that if the ship hadn't arrived even that day, then the story would have been very, very different. Trésor, a lovely young man, had a smile even when he was still suffering from the problems after he'd got burnt as a child, because so many children are either maimed for life or sadly killed because of falling into fires, because they don't have what we have, the gas, the electricity. And so cooking is an open fire. Lighting is likely to be a paraffin lamp, candles. There are pots of stew, pots of boiling water all over the areas where the children are playing. And so many children have accidents in childhood. And bless him, you know, he'd still manage a little smile. But once he'd had his operations, once they'd released the skin, once they'd given him skin grafts, and then look at that, what a determined young man, determined to push that nurse's arm over, determined to get his strength back into his muscles. He hadn't used his arm since he was a toddler, and then he was working his socks off to try and get it as strong as it needed to be, to learn all those exercises and to be able to do what other boys do when he got back home. So fantastic young man, what a hard worker he was. This young man, Ulrich, he was born with a condition which meant that his muscles and his bones didn't grow at the same rate. If he'd been born in this country with that condition, he would have had operations and treatment before he was even thinking about crawling. But sadly, he hadn't anything. And so he just had to manage the best he could. And all Ulrich wanted was to be as tall as everybody else. He hated looking at everybody else's knees. He hated being down there on the floor. He just wanted to be tall enough. And bless him, he was tall enough, but not just tall enough, but mobile. And I could just imagine him saying, well, come on then, where's the football, lads? Let's get going, because now I can join in instead of watching all you play without me. What a fantastic thing, isn't that amazing? He had a lot of operations, a lot of physio, but boy, it would have been worth it for him. The rehab team, the physios, well, they're renowned the world over, aren't they, for being bullies, but they need to be. They need to push people. They need to be as on the ball as possible to get those exercises done, to make sure the patients understand how important it is to keep that mobility, to keep that strength going. So they do have a hard job, but so worthwhile. There are many ladies in these countries, possibly 2 million across the world, suffering from obstetric fistulas. From when the babies get stuck during birth, they don't have the maternity care that we have. And so sadly, the babies can be stuck for several days and eventually stillborn, leaving the mum not only with no baby, but sadly with such dreadful internal injuries that she can be doubly incontinent for the rest of her life. And for these ladies, it really means life's over. There just is no quality of life left to them. They smell, they're unhygienic, and people consider them to be cursed because of what's happened to them. Quite often, people with other conditions, either something they're born with or something that happens to them, again will be outcast and considered cursed simply because of something that wasn't their fault. And so these ladies and others will hide away in their homes. Those with facial tumours will hide under a towel because nobody wants them, nobody wants to see them, and they are shunned. Quite often they will be bullied, they may have stones thrown at them, and they really are suffering in so many, many ways, not just physically, but emotionally and socially. And they think there are, as I say, about 2 million ladies with fistulas across the world, but they just don't know where they are because they do hide away in their homes and often will never show their faces again. Usually the only person who sticks by them will be their mum, and otherwise even their best friend will probably forget they're still alive. But after an operation on the ship, which is 85% successful the first time, and if it isn't, they can heal up and then have another operation and another operation until they're healed and dry and clean and ready to go home. And then they have a special ceremony to send them off home. So the seamstress on the ship will make them a lovely new outfit to symbolize the new life they're returning to. And they have a special ceremony called Gladdy Gladdy on a Monday. They all gather on deck 7 and they sing and they dance and they celebrate and they thank God for sending the ship and these people to give them back a life they thought they'd never ever have again. And they're given an opportunity to say something if they want to. And this lady in blue here, she said, through a translator, she said, "If I dance like a mad woman, it's because for 20 years, loneliness was my only friend." Wow. You know, what a thing to happen. You know, it's unthinkable, isn't it? That people should be outcast simply because of something they have no control over whatsoever. Bless her. She looks so happy, doesn't she? General surgery can look a lot less dramatic in some ways, but this tumour was growing into this little chap's brain. He needed that surgery, otherwise he would not still be here now. And something as basic as cataracts, they are so common now, we barely take any notice when somebody says they're having the cataract done. We're more likely to tell them whether there's a good sale in Marks and Spencer's or not. But for these patients, they have lost their sight and they have no other way of seeing. There's no other help for them. And yet a basic 15-minute cataract surgery can can change their lives. And these three, a brother and 2 sisters, they all had cataracts in childhood. So that mum had to keep an eye on those 3 children, not just protecting them from the fire that they might be careless enough to fall into, but the fire that they can't even see. But once they had their surgery, what a change of life for that whole family. Do a lot of dental work, and so many people suffering from basic problems with their teeth. And a country like Sierra Leone at the last count had 1 dentist per million. So even if you could afford to pay the dentist, you probably couldn't find them. And so the dentists work on the land. They borrow a facility, maybe a wing of a hospital or part of a community centre, and they set up their dental clinic there, and they just beaver away, getting rid of dental infections, either drilling it out, or if they can't be sure of drilling it out, if they're not 100% sure they've got all that infection, they will take out the tooth rather than risk it coming back after the ship's left. Because some of these dreadful facial tumours that we see on the ship are caused simply by a dental infection that just grows and spreads, and eventually it can kill the patient. And so it's really important to get rid of those infected teeth. The palliative care team, well, I think they have the hardest job on the ship because they're not looking forward to those happy endings that everybody else is. But they can do a lot to support people. They can give wound care, pain relief, support them in whatever way they can, just maybe helping them to come to terms with what's going to happen, putting things in place for their family if that needs to be done. Lots of ways that they can help and support, even if it's not the happy outcome that every other department's looking for. And Mercy Ships is trying as much as possible to leave behind a healthcare system in a better shape than when they arrived. They're trying to support them in whatever ways they possibly can to get those facilities, to get those people trained with new techniques, whatever they need, they will do. So they will go to the local hospitals, they will talk to the health ministry and ask what help they would like what help they need. And this is this lovely young man here, Emmanuel. He's from Benin. Emmanuel came onto the ship when the ship was in Benin to work as a day worker. And I think everybody soon realized there was a lot more to Emmanuel than just somebody who was good at translating and cleaning. And so Emmanuel was sent over to America to train as a biomedical technician. And he is fantastic. And what a lovely young man he is, isn't he? Just gorgeous. I'd marry my daughters off to him anytime. But that's beside the point. He is lovely and such a wonderful young man. And he is now responsible for a lot of the biomedical training, not just on the ship, but also in his home country of Benin, because it's so important that people have the support and the machinery. But if you've got the machinery and no support and no training, what happens when it goes wrong? Because these things do go wrong, we know that. So Emmanuel does a fantastic job on the ship and off the ship, just helping those countries in the work that they're doing. There's lots of medical training too, and providing equipment. Yeah, many of these countries don't have the equipment that they need. They don't have the facilities they need, or if they have the facilities, they really aren't up to much. And so they will send in teams to just help them to get their places looking better and working better. So of course the outside isn't the most important bit, the inside is. And that to me doesn't look a particularly inviting operating theatre, but you can transform it in a short time and make it something that they can be really proud to use. This lovely young man is Emmanuel's brother, Eliphaz, and he's in charge of the agriculture project. Eliphaz is passionate about helping people to eat a good, nutritious diet, because many, many problems can be caused by poor nutrition in the mum during pregnancy, poor nutrition during childhood. And so Eliphaz will teach techniques where people can motion compost instead of buying expensive fertilizer. And so Eliphaz will set up the projects out of town, training people and helping them to produce much more from their piece of land simply by mulching, composting, and then offering to take away the chicken manure from the local farm that they didn't want anyway. That means people can then produce more than they need for their family. So they have extra to sell, they have extra seed to collect and sell, and then they have more money that then they can use for education and healthcare and all those other things that they might not have been able to afford before. So as I said before, the ship is staffed entirely by volunteers, whether they're a surgeon, an anaesthetist, a nurse, a head of medical services, or whether they are a deckhand, a carpenter, the captain. Everybody will be a volunteer, and they will pay for the privilege of being a volunteer because they will pay their own board and lodging to be on the ship. But it means that Mercy ships can use the money they raise for the care of the patients and the equipment and the medicines and things that they need. They will need IT experts. As I say, they will need a captain, a first officer, an engineer, whoever they are, lots of electricians, deckies, all those people to keep your ship up to scratch and in good order, as well as everybody, of course, to keep your hospital in well order. And even underneath the ship, you need to keep things in order. So you have your dive team who will go down to keep the inlets clear so they can suck the cold water from the dock and circulate it around the engines and generators to keep them cool. Apparently, there is a waiting list to join the dive team, but personally, I wouldn't join a waiting list to go into water that dirty and disgusting, but they love it. They love it. They just can't wait to get down there for some reason, bless them. And security, sadly, has to be very tight. And so we have a team of Nepalese Gurkhas. They are also paid like the day workers. They will be paid to work on the ship for 3 months, and then they go home for 3 months and another team will come to take over. They're amazing. They know the names of every single person on the ship. They can hit a rat, a moving rat, at about 50 yards with a catapult and get it. And they can also cook amazing food. So they are pretty special, the Gurkhas. So the gangway is constantly monitored and manned. So you have to scan on and off the ship with your identity card. Patients will have to scan on and off. Visitors, everybody will be scanned on and off the ship because it's really important to keep your ship safe. Sadly, stowaways, piracy, they're all a very, very present threat. And so it's really important. And also we have a fire team. So people alongside their other job will also can be part of the fire team. Very highly trained. It's really, really important, particularly when the ship is sailing up to the shipyard. And there was one day just towards the end of a service, they start practicing with the fire team in earnest. And so there will be an alarm sounds and everybody has to go to their muster stations. But if you're leaving the ship before the ship goes to shipyard, then you just go into the dining room and sit there and have a cup of tea and a chat instead of having to report to your muster station. So we went to the dining room to sit and have a chat, but that's where the fire was. So there was all this smoke in there, and there were all these firemen there, and a pretend victim as well, a couple of people who've been overcome by smoke that they had to carry out. So we got a really good bird's eye view of that one. So that was an entertaining day. You need to keep your crew and your patients well fed with really good, nutritious food. So the galley team and the dining room team are extremely important and work really, really hard. And if, like many people, you take your family with you, because some people will volunteer for years and years. And so you take your wife, your family, and you go off, or your husband and your family, you go off, and you need to think of their education too. And so there's an academy on board the ship, staffed with fully qualified teachers who, like everybody else, work for free, pay for their own board and lodging, and they clean their own classrooms. And then in the holidays, they work somewhere else on the ship. So they're pretty special. Some people aren't satisfied with just having a day job. They spend their weekends building wheelchairs. And this lovely young man, Osman, he and some of the others used to build these wheelchairs called PETs, personal energy transport, for people whose legs were no longer able to support them, but they got good strong arms to get themselves around. So this chap, instead of crawling along the pavement, maybe just begging, is now up at eye level with everybody else and able to get around town, maybe even do a job. Fantastic. Some people will spend their Saturday afternoon going down to the orphanage, take a CD player, some craft items, and just have some fun, support the local community and the local people in whatever ways they can. People come from all over the world to work on the ship. There's usually about between 35 and 40 different countries represented at a time, but all there for the same reason, to help those people have that surgery that they desperately need. They have national offices around the world as well to raise funds, support and volunteers. Senegal, they had to leave early, but they still made a huge impact on their country, and they still plan to go back. Just nearly there, I hope. So the ship went to the shipyard, as it would have done anyway, but a little earlier than planned, to have work done on it. It's still there. They're having extra work that they'd planned anyway. And also they've been supporting the countries that they visit with lots of different equipment, as well as some online training to cope with COVID. The next excitement on our list is our new ship, which is now done sea trials. It's been built, purpose-built. It's the largest hospital ship in the world now, 6 operating theatres, and it should be ready to go by the end of this year. So that's really exciting. We can't wait for this all to happen. And then we'll have 2 ships. The Africa Mercy will have had its big refit and be ready to go as well. So that's the next excitement. It needs to be kitted out in the Philippines, but it's had its sea trials already. So I'll just leave you for this part with a quote from Dr. Gary, our chief surgeon, who said, "We can't change the whole world, but we can change the whole world for the individuals, one life at a time. And that's what's worth doing." Any ways that people can support Mercy ships is always, of course, very, very gratefully received. So thank you for listening. I think we're just about to get cut off.
Thank you.
And then I will return after coffee break and tell you some of the places I've been to and some of the things I've seen and done.
Thank you so much, Alison. I think Mercy ships ought to run the world. That's absolutely incredible. Wonderful way of human cooperation.
So here we are back again. Now this might be a little less slick, because obviously this isn't the sort of presentation I normally do when people ask to hear about mercy ships. So I've put together some just things that I find fascinating about some of the countries that I've visited. So I have actually concentrated on this corner of West Africa. I'm always tempted to stray onto Madagascar because I found that amazing. But then I realized, looking back at my presentation, I had done that before. So for the sake of those who did see it before, I've really just stuck to 3 countries that we visited recently, which was Cameroon and Guinea and Benin, and a little bit of Togo as well. So the countries that Mercy Ships has recently visited are Senegal, Guinea, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Togo, Benin, Cameroon, the Republic of Congo, and Madagascar. So they are in the last dozen years, maybe. In years before, they did visit the Caribbean with their smaller ship, one of the smaller ships. But at the moment, this is where they're concentrating their work. And so, of course, the ship is usually berthed in. Oh, now why is it not moving on? Come on, wake up. Let's just click. Oh, here we are. So the ship will be berthed in the main port, usually the capital city, but not always. But it will be the main port of that city, because that provides the best access for the patients, and it also provides access for mercy ships to facilities in town. And also, hopefully, it's the safest place. You can't guarantee that. Of course, some countries can be quite unstable at times. Mercy ships will tend to avoid visiting a country if there are elections coming up, or if there has been an election, obviously after a military coup or something like that. They just would not want to take the ship there, partly for the sake of the patients. They don't want people traveling around the country. They need to keep safe, so they will avoid places that are in any way unsafe in their estimation, at least at the time. In Togo, we were very fortunate to have half of the Togolese Navy berthed right opposite us. This was half the Togolese Navy. Bless them. But we were very grateful for that. We didn't need them, fortunately, but it was nice to know they were there. But as the work of mercy ships has expanded, then they use the docks more and more. And so if you see along the dock there are a number of whitish tents and some Land Rovers, various vehicles, canopies, things like that. And that's the area where the ship was berthed. This was in Guinea, and they had to move the ship. We were actually berthed there. That's where we were berthed, but they had a dredger dredging the docks, and so we had to move the ship. Well, that's not just like moving, get your car keys out and move the car. This was a big deal. It took the deck department at least a day to get the ship ready, just to move it a few hundred yards down the dock, so that this green dredger could get in to dredge the area where we'd been, so they could complete their work. So all sorts of fun things happen. But you can see the tents on the dock area there. You can't see, some of them are a bit hidden behind the containers there. Containers are very useful to use for barriers when you're short of something. So it was, I say, it was quite a big job to move. And then, of course, all the tents were still there, which is where they'd have admissions, outpatients, physio. Lots of things happen in these big blow up tents there. And there's also the area where the patients wait in the shade, and the maintenance area, supply area, all those things. So they were all separated from the ship for a couple of days by about 200 or 300 yards. So right in the next area of the port, while the dredger did its job, but we managed. And we have very interesting neighbours sometimes. It's a fantastic thing. You would never ever get to see a port unless you worked there. But this was one of our neighbours, because in Guinea, apparently they are the biggest exporters of bauxite. They have the biggest reserves of bauxite in the world. And so one of our next door neighbours was loading bauxite, which, as you can see, was not a clean process. Guinea also have large reserves of iron. They export gold, diamonds, oil, and coffee. And yet they're one of the poorest countries in the world. And I will not get on my soapbox about corruption, but You just wonder why, don't you? So on the other side, we had a ship unloading iron ore, and again, not a clean process. And one of the jobs that my husband and I have been doing on the ship in the last few years is to be part of the pack-up team. And one of our big jobs is to clean the tents on the docks. And that was not a blessing when you've got people either side of you unloading all this stuff all the time, and have been doing so for the previous 10 months. And so we had a very big job that year to try and get those tents white again. So we used brushes, we used power washers, we used lots of elbow grease, lots of water, but eventually they did just about come white again. And then we could pack them up and put them into the container ready to go on the ship for the ship to move. But it was an interesting experience that year. There was an awful lot of dirt. And we have some very interesting companions on the dockside as well. Regular lizards who appear from all over the place. This was quite an interesting day for one of the ladies on our team who does not like spiders. This spider was huge, and it was hiding in some of the pallets. So they put down a board of a sort of bed of pallets for the tents to be erected on, and then we had to take them all apart at the end. And as we took some of the boards off, there happily ensconced on one of the pallets was this huge spider with her nest and sack of eggs. She was not going to be happy because she was going to be unhoused. And then we had another lovely visitor in Guinea, and it was this kingfisher. And he came most days, and he would be on the top of some of the buildings singing to us. And sometimes he would come a bit closer and gave us some really lovely chances of some photographs. But they're just not like kingfishers we have here. Kingfishers here, they just like a flash of blue, and that's it. That was a kingfisher. But he would just sit there on the lines or on the top of the building singing his socks off to us. So he was beautiful. And in the water of the docks, you would imagine that these docks being docks and being West African docks, they were full of rubbish. And I thought this fish was decomposed, but it wasn't. This was a live fish. He didn't move a lot, but he did move around a bit. It's amazing what you see in these places. And pipefish, we did spot a few of those. Some other little silverfish that you couldn't really take photographs of, but there is life there in spite of all the rubbish. And the occasional jellyfish swimming along next to some more rubbish. So yes, it's amazing what can be there. And the ships come and go all the time. Lots and lots of container ships. Lots of these ports have huge stocks of containers. And I do wonder whether anybody knows who owns them, because some of them will have been there a long time, such that people can't afford the fees for them having been there. And so they can't get their container out because they can't afford to pay for how long it's been there. And these containers just sit there for years and years. It must be an absolute nightmare. Lots and lots of bulk carriers and things like that. And then alongside them, some little fishing boats in and out. I don't think that would be allowed in the UK, personally. I'm not sure, but I might be wrong. But you'd certainly seem a little bit strange to have these chaps out in their fishing boat amongst these huge, great tankers and carriers. And in Cameroon, they were moving logs to some of the ships, but they were coming in at one area of the port and then being put onto these rafts and then dragged up the docks to be loaded on the ship. And then they just let the rafts free to just bounce their way down the side of all the other ships back to where they started. It was quite interesting, really. You just think that you wouldn't have these huge, heavy rafts just bouncing around in the dark normally, but they do. And something else you wouldn't necessarily see in a port in this sort of side of the world is wrecks. Because people sometimes, they've got their ship, they've got their boat, and then it needs some repairs, but they can't afford it. And so what do? Well, they can't do anything because they haven't got any money. And so the wrecks just sit there and sit there and sit there. And when it's low tide, you can see them. Or when it's high tide, you can barely see them. And there are wrecks all over the dock area. So how they manage to negotiate them, I do not know. Because it's okay when you can see a bit of them. But once the tide goes up, how do you get past these things? I just don't know. And they're just sitting there. But the birds like them. This was again in Cameroon, and there were storks everywhere. Sorry, not storks, pelicans everywhere on these wrecks. So they enjoyed them. There were always some to watch, and if you've got a good zoom on your camera, you can get some really nice photos of them enjoying using these wrecks for their landing places. And then I don't know whether these are white herons or egrets, so I never know quite which to which. But again, they were enjoying the wrecks, and it was nice for us to be able to watch them. And yes, you just see these fascinating little creatures around, even on the decks. There's little bits and pieces that you can watch happening. And sometimes you get amazing birds just flying by. And I took this photograph on my iPhone, and these birds had been flying. Every day we'd see one or two, and sometimes they'd fly really, really close to the ship. So it was lovely to be able to watch them. And this one had just caught its tea. And if you could look carefully, just sort of underneath its tail there, you can see it's got its fish, the tea that it was taking away. And again, just taken with my iPhone, sort of leaning backwards over the rail of the ship and hoping not to fall in. So it does get quite hot there. These were a couple of weather forecasts that we saw. You see 94% humidity, now 32 degrees, but feels like 41. Yes, it does feel like 41 sometimes, I must admit. So you can imagine working out on the docks, we do get rather hot and sticky. People who work on the ship have air conditioning generally. And so they're wearing sort of cardigans and long trousers. And we have to wear long trousers for safety, but we are usually absolutely boiled and sticky by the time we come in. So we are usually ready for a nice sit down in the evenings. Sometimes we just sit up on the deck and watch the sun go down. This is Mount Cameroon, and it was lovely to be able to just sit up there and watch the sun go down behind Mount Cameroon. But before the sun completely went down, we would sit there. I couldn't photograph these, but you would suddenly see hundreds and hundreds of small birds flying from the city over towards Mount Cameroon, and they were parrots apparently. And then on the way back, once the parrots had all gone to the room, then you would see more little black creatures coming back from Cameroon into town, and they were bats.
Well, so, I put the bags behind the ottoman.
And then sometimes we just sit and enjoy a game of bananagrams. So that's always good fun, just to relax after work. If we don't want to venture out any further, then there's nothing like a good game of bananagrams, especially when a lot of your opponents are American and use different words and different spellings that you want to object to. And the two of them are Dutch, and they are amazing to play bananagrams in English, but they do it. We venture away from the docks sometimes on our days off. Everybody gets days off. Most people will work a sort of 5-day week, but sometimes shifts depending on your job. You get just outside the dock gates and there are queues and queues and queues of lorries. And because people have to queue for so long, they sleep under their lorry. So this is where they will put their blanket at night, and then they will just sleep under their lorry, waiting for their turn to go in. And I just find it fascinating that the way people live their lives on the streets. So you have your baby and you have your bread, and when you're tired, you just both lie down and have a sleep, and hope somebody just leaves the money behind if they want some of your bread. And people make things on the streets, they repair things on the streets. You can see people repairing bicycles and cars right on the side of the road, making this lovely furniture that they make. Everywhere people are making beds and chairs and dressers and cupboards, and just out on the streets, life just happens on the streets. Sadly, rubbish is abandoned on the streets everywhere. It just fascinates me. And of course, lots and lots of market stalls. Lots of people will buy everything they need from a market stall on the street. But sometimes there are nice shops as well. I've put this one in for my friend Joe, who's watching. This is one of my favourite haunts, which will be a fabric stall. And as you can see, there are just so many gorgeous, tempting fabrics there. And then I just love the way they're so enterprising. You know, what better use for a martini bottle than to fill it up with peanuts and then use it as a container to sell. Good for them, you know, much better than plastic bags any day. But then you might use your bottles for other things like bootleg petrol, which can be found in various side streets. But, you know, if you've got a motorbike and you need a bit of petrol, then why not just nip to a little side stall instead of going to the proper petrol stations? And of course, you know, isn't it fascinating to watch these ladies, or usually ladies anyway, with stuff on their heads? I'm so in awe of them. How they manage it. She's carrying her stool because at some point she'll sit on her stool and give her legs a rest and people will crowd round and buy her bread. But the rest of the time, she's not even holding it with her hands. And then you see ladies with piles of eggs on their heads. I've never managed to get a photograph yet, but I will do one of these days, like a whole pyramid of eggs just on their heads, not even holding him with one hand. Amazing. I'm so impressed. And of course, cars. I do think that sometimes there's a competition to see what you can pile on top of a car, because people or van, you know, there's just so much stuff. And you don't really see stuff falling off very often, I must admit. But it's pretty impressive. But I'm not sure that we'd get away with that here either, would we? And then how many can you fit on a motorbike? Well, there's only 4 here. But I have on some of my trips seen more than 4. I think the record so far is a family of 7 on one motorbike. But the most interesting thing I ever saw, which again, I didn't manage to photograph, was Dad on the front of the motorbike, Mum on the back of the motorbike, and in between them was their son, who must have just been released from hospital because he was still attached to his drip. So Mum was holding the bag with the fluid, and the boy was still attached with this tube to the drip, and they were taking him home, I presume. Amazing what you see on a motorbike. And the roads, well, you know, some of the roads are pretty decent and safe. Some of them are a little tricky when they fill up with water, and they're very sandy, and you don't really know quite how deep the water is, but you hope it's not too deep for your car. And some of them are just downright dangerous, because this road had been closed the day before for resurfacing. And there, you look sort of to the left there, there's a huge big hole still in it. So how can you resurface a road, but you somehow don't manage to fill the holes in? And then you can see at the edge there, you know, just grating that's empty. There's no manhole cover. In the dark, there's no street lights. How are you going to not fall into it? Just scary. But of course, this one has been protected. This was in the middle of the roundabout by the main port gate, and there was a manhole cover missing. So somebody had put this piece of wood in there to warn people not to drive over it. But oh dear, it was there all the time we were there. So it wasn't getting mended quick. Health and safety isn't quite the same as it is here. Scaffolding is quite often made up of branches or, well, sort of trunks of thin trees. And it doesn't seem that railings or anything like that are a thing. So people just wandering around building on top of these places, it's very brave to say the least. And in the towns, of course, it's busy. A lot of these cities are very, very busy. Lots of motorbikes, sometimes cycles. In Madagascar, there were a lot of little bikes that you could have a ride. You know, you had like a cart at the back, and you could have rides on the back. Some of them are motorbike taxis, some of them are ordinary taxis. Sometimes it's just cars and cars and cars and lorries. I mean, this queue was not moving fast. I can't remember how long it took us to actually escape from town, but it was a long, long queue. But this is daily life for many people. People just have to take account of this when they're trying to travel around. I think we wouldn't tolerate it, would we? We would just get too fed up for words and do something different. But sometimes people just have to spend a lot of their time traveling and queuing. And of course, then you still get the fast food places, even in some of these cities, which are wonderfully different to ours, and yet you still end up with fast food, street food as well. Sometimes we decide to be adventurous and try some of the local street food, and it really is quite often extremely delicious. So we certainly enjoyed that day. And yes, just cooking out on the roads, people walking by, just picking up food as they go along. And I was fascinated by this item in the menu, poulet bicyclette. And I must admit, I thought, oh, these are the ones that get run over by the bicycles. But apparently I did look it up, and it isn't. They're called poulet bicyclette. They are wild chickens that roam the roads, but they're quite often the ones that people hang by their feet still live on their bicycle handlebars. So that's why they're called poulet bicyclette. So if you ever go to West Africa and see that on the menu, that's what it is. It isn't one that got run over by a bicycle. It just was a wild one. So unless, of course, this vulture gets them first. He was obviously enjoying a bit of roadkill. So sometimes we go out for the evening and go a little bit more upmarket. This was the most delicious crab meal I have ever had, and accompanied by Leicester City on the television. And we're playing, I can't remember who it was in red, but yeah, Leicester City were playing on the television, which was just bizarre, isn't it? You go all the way to West Africa to watch City play, but I can't even remember whether they won that. I don't think we watched. Sometimes there are even more upmarket places to go. There are one or two beautiful places to go and eat. This was just stunning. And look at that for cakes. I mean, that is just amazing. But this isn't what the average man in the street is going to buy, of course. This is mainly for either government officials or the few expats that are around, but certainly not for most people. But we do enjoy going to look and occasionally have a little treat. But normally our favourite treat is ice cream. You can get ice cream in all these places. It really is a nice way to cool off in the evening. And there's usually plenty of choice of flavours as well. We do find some nice ice cream spots. And just getting out away from the ship and the dock is lovely. But you do find the contrasts in these countries are very, very close together. So we drove across this bridge and we were going down to a little restaurant just on the side there. I think it's the bit with the white and the red wall. And we sat there and it was beautiful and we watched the sun go down. So that was the bridge that we'd taken the first photo from. But then you turn the other way and you look, and this is where people are living. These are people's homes, rubbish, just a shanty town all put together. But I loved the quote, well, the little logo on the side of this boat. And it says, if you can see it, no food for lazy man. And you think, oh, good for them. You know, they're not just sitting back thinking, well, you know, what are we going to do? They're out in their boat, fishing in all sorts of weathers and all sorts of places, just to be able to keep their family going. But for some people, life is really, really tough, as you can imagine. And sometimes we do get even further out of town, just to the edge of town, but sometimes we will be able to go and visit different places out of town. Life becomes a little bit greener, a little bit quieter, quite often a lot less rubbish around, lovely people that you meet out there, just again, living their lives on the streets, building their homes amongst the trees. Just a very much quieter, more peaceful way of life, certainly not the same sort of traffic jams that you find in the town. So it certainly does seem a lot nicer out there. But again, very basic homes, not always even in one piece, sometimes a little bit more structured. Some of these will perhaps be left from colonial days and a little bit more structured, but maybe not such good condition in some ways because they've obviously been there a long time and been battered by time and weather. And this was a town that we went to visit in Benin, and we went out there. It was quite a drive from the port city, and it's called Ouida. And this is the place where the slaves were taken from West Africa and transported across to the West. And it's a sad thing, isn't it? You know, the slave trade was just horrendous, but we can't hide from the fact. So we thought it was right that we should go and find out at least some of what we, you know, was part of our heritage in some ways as much as part of theirs. Again, there was a few chicken bicyclette and poulet bicyclette around, but you know, quiet little town or barely a town really. But there were people there who could explain to us some of the things that were happening, and they put memorials up there talking about the different places. So the slaves would come in from quite a number of different countries around Benin, and then they would be taken to this particular little port called Ouidah. And there were various, like sort of almost like ceremonies, and this they were called the tree of forgetting, and they were made to walk around this tree 3 times and told, right, you need to forget your family because you're never seeing them again. I mean, it's just unthinkable, isn't it? But this is what happened to these people. Sadly, sometimes the tribal chiefs would be colluding with the slave masters and actually selling their own people. And then these people will be taken here, they will be told, right, you've just got to forget your family, you've got to forget your past, because that's not going to be part of your life ever again. Some of it is really, you know, quite hard to listen to, it's quite hard to take, but sadly this is part of their heritage, and you know, we need to recognize that and recognize, you know, what they've come from, and you know, how they might feel towards people like us. And then this is the gateway that they built on the beach. So this is the beach that they would have walked down to get onto the slave ships. And this is a sort of memorial to them. You can just see the water of the sea in the background. There was a huge storm coming, but fortunately we managed to get to a little tiny restaurant in town before it absolutely threw it down. But the clouds were getting very threatening at that point. But yeah, this is where the slaves left from to get to their future. But you know, it's all about the people, isn't it, really? And these are some of the wonderful day crew that we worked with in Cameroon, and as you can see, they were a fun bunch of girls. And quite often at the end of what they call the service, the end of the 10 months, then there will be little celebrations, and all our team, somebody arranged for us all to have matching t-shirts, and they have parties, they have celebrations, and lots of fun, because people, you know, they've all worked together for 10 months. We weren't there for 10 months, obviously, we were just there for the end, but it's a lovely time to be there and to get to know them. And yeah, although there are lots of interesting things to see, for me, actually, it's the people that make it what it is. So yeah, they are, oh, I think that was my last picture. Yeah, because that's what it's all about. It's the people who need the operations. It's the people that we meet to work with them, and the people that we keep in touch with. Some of them I'm still in touch with, which is lovely. You know, Facebook does have its advantages, and yeah, it's all about the people, really. So I think that's.
Thank you very much, Alison. Thank you so much that you've taken us into totally different worlds.